welcome to the chat and learn today at Power to Fly. My name is Hunter. My pronouns are he, they, and I am so glad you are here. Thank you for your patience as we were getting all those little wrinkles ironed out of that freshly pressed shirt now. Feels good to wear it. Okay, so welcome. So first off, we're going to go a little bit of housekeeping. Let's get started. You can participate. You can turn on your camera to enjoy the fun. It's a great way for our speaker and myself and the other participants to connect with you. You can ask questions in the chat. So you don't have to worry about looking Instagram ready or any of that. This is just a little fireside chat that we are hoping to engage with you in, where there'll be some opportunities for you to ask your questions. And we are recording this, so you will pop up in the record if you do turn your camera on, and we'll post the chat in our YouTube channel in the next couple of days at the Power to Fly Chat and Learns. So if you have any questions that come up, feel free to put them in the chat. You can write them publicly so everyone can see it. Please keep in mind that this is a safe space, so be mindful of our language and tone and inclusivity for everyone to enjoy themselves here. And if you'd like to ask a question privately or anonymously, you can go over to the chat feature, select my name, Hunter, and I will be the only one that sees that question, and I'm happy to ask that question on your behalf anonymously. Or if there's any concerns that come up, feel free to message me as well, and we will do our best to address that as quickly as possible. And you can follow us on all the social medias at Power to Fly, hashtag Power to Fly, on all the things. So please do check us out and feel free to tag us with any of your posts, insights, feedback. We love it. Okay, without further ado, it is my very great pleasure to welcome back Dr. Mary Hemphill. I'm so happy to have this opportunity to speak with you again today. So Dr. Mary is an author, K-12 educator, administrator, leadership expert, and coach and motivational speaker. Mary works with learning and working communities and speaks to audiences across the country. She teaches about the impact of fusing education, empowerment, and leadership. She holds a PhD in leadership studies from North Carolina A&T State University, and currently teaches as an adjunct professor at the University of North Carolina. My Southern drawl starting to come out there. Hello. At Chapel Hill. So Dr. Hemphill is also the CEO and co-founder of the Limitless Lady LLC, helping individuals ignite the leader in themselves to better serve their community, company, and personal career. So happy to have you back. How are you today? How have you been?
I'm doing great, Hunter. Thank you so much for having me back here to kick off March, Women's History Month, to have this important discussion, but just excited to be able to engage. And thank you so much to Power to Fly for having me.
Oh, it is such a gift to have you back. So friends, the way this next chat and learn works is I have a list of questions that were pre-submitted by y'all. So thank you so much for writing those questions. If that is new information, you go, what? I can send questions in advance? Yes, you can. So if you go to our webpage with all of the upcoming chat and learns, there's a box at the bottom where you can submit your questions and we pull those questions. So please do feel free to do that for our future chat and learns. And today, if any questions come up that you would like to ask, you can do so by dropping that in the chat, and Mary and I will go down those questions as well. So, Mary, before we jump in, could you share a little bit with our listeners here and our participants a bit about your career journey, why this subject is important for you, and a little bit, just to set the stage for where we're at today. And like you said, it's March 1st, it's Women's History Month. So what a great way to start the month.
Absolutely. And again, I'm so excited to be here. And really, as I think about my professional career and even founding the Limitless Lady, it started because I was a limited leader for much of my career. As I look back over my almost 20-year career in education, I was a turnaround principal. And so as a turnaround principal, I was often recruited and I was often asked to go into some of the toughest schools across the state of North Carolina, not necessarily because of workplace conditions or because of crime or violence, but because those schools serve low socioeconomic populations, students who came from poverty, as well as had a lack of resources to be able to support what was necessary for those schools. And I now coach and have the opportunity to consult with organizations who often find themselves in crisis. But I think the one thing that really resonates for me with this topic when it comes to the glass cliff and women of color, when it comes to being promoted into the leadership positions that we're finding ourselves on, is because over the past 3 years, the glass cliff has really increased when companies and public agencies, organizations are not only scrambling to really diversify their staffs, to launch diversity and inclusion initiatives, but oftentimes the last 3 years too have challenged organizations, companies, and education institutions of learning to say, we need to lead differently. We must do something differently. We must educate and empower our people differently. And women of color have found themselves 13% more likely to be promoted into the positions for organizations, schools, and institutions that find themselves in crisis. And so now we have this very unique leadership paradigm that I have experienced over my 20 years, where the idea of compassion fatigue, burnout, stress, navigating microaggressions, implicit and unconscious bias has now led to, we have a cohort of women who have navigated this pillar of leadership without the proper support, without the proper guidance, and along the way have not been compensated appropriately. The pay parity does exist collectively, but individually for women of color, as we have really sort of started to really start peel back the layers of this onion, it is very apparent that the glass cliff is real, and that women of color now are starting to say, okay, what are the tools? What are the words? What are the languages? What are the strategies that I need so that at the end of my professional journey, I still have me. I still am me. And I think not only is this a personal experience, but also with just some of the C-suite leaders that I've coached as well, that a lot of women are starting to ask the right questions as they gain their seat at the table.
Wow, what an amazing way to set us off here. And thank you so much for sharing about some of your personal experiences there and clarifying this topic and where we're at right now. And I love, I'm so excited I'm grateful really to be chatting about this, because I think a lot of us have heard about the glass ceiling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a term, I think, there's only so far up that, like, historically and still today, like women and folks of color, it's like you can see what's happening up there, but you can't break through, right? So I think we're familiar with this metaphor, but can you talk to me about what the difference, and maybe define a bit of what the glass ceiling is and what a glass cliff is?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when we're talking about the glass ceiling, we're talking about moving up. And when we're talking about the glass cliff, we're talking about moving across. So when I think about the glass ceiling, what I'm talking about is the invisible but real. And I think that's very important that we clarify the difference, is that even though the glass ceiling is very real in terms of being a barrier that can prevent women who are talented, women who possess leadership skills and strategies, from being promoted into those senior leadership roles. And there's a lot of things that contribute to the glass ceiling and that upward mobility. It could be everything from human capital barriers. It could be everything from gender-based stereotypes, meaning when I think of manager, when I think of leader, I think male. I work with a lot of STEM and engineering organizations where perpetually engineer is seen as a male-dominated profession. Well, so when I start to think of a leader of engineering, when it comes to those companies and organizations, my mind, because of unconscious bias, because of my wiring, because of my assumptions, may not always go to female. So there, when it comes to the glass ceiling, you're fighting that when it comes to upward mobility. Also, women's exclusion from informal networks. A lot of upward mobility and getting through the glass ceiling happens with relationships. I had an amazing professor in college who wrote a wonderful paper about the fact that upward mobility happens on the golf course. And we still have paradigms where a lot of those business deals happen verbally in networks that women are not necessarily invited to or don't frequent as much. But the difference between the glass ceiling being an invisible but real barrier and the glass cliff is that the glass cliff is a much, much, much more recent phenomenon that really says, okay, we have a disproportionate representation of women in these senior leadership roles. And when we elevate them, we're elevating them into roles that are already coming with increased risk and are increasingly precarious. That is because the realities around those roles may have been mismanaged, they may have been miscommunicated, or they may be misunderstood. And so when we think about the glass cliff and putting women in leadership in those positions, we're asking them to do sometimes the impossible. We're saying, hey, listen, our bottom line is decreasing. We need you to increase sales. Hey, our retention numbers are tanking. We need you to figure out how to get the best talent in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of a hiring freeze, at the precipice of a recession. So it's these huge, impossible, and not necessarily impossible, but just daunting tasks that we're then asking women to come into and say, okay, step onto this cliff. Here are the situations, here are the characteristics. And by the way, don't fall off while we're still navigating a very collective and real issue facing women in leadership already.
Yes, there's so much that we're going through, have been going through, and there's so many obstacles and challenges. You said the hiring freeze is enormous right now.
Yes.
And it is, and there's, as we've seen very publicly in the news with, new rounds of layoffs and all of these things that are happening. So there's a lot to overcome right now. And I hope and I believe that we will be able to get through it. And I think we're going to be able to get through it because of folks like you that are going to help us hold our hands and show us the way with some of this.
Absolutely. And I think conversations like this are as well, Hunter. And I had a conversation with a colleague the other day about this topic. And she said to me, Mary, this is great because characteristics and checklists are not going to solve this problem. Conversations are going to move us through this problem. And so I love that Power to Fly is offering this opportunity for discussion because you're going to hear me say collective and individual a lot because collectively it is a plight, but it's also individual, it's personal. What Elizabeth on this call may be going through, experiencing, or even facing in terms of a challenge in the same organization may be completely different than Susan, but it's still real. And so that's why I think that conversations like this are going to help educate and empower us forward.
Yes. I am so grateful to be here with you. You are so great. You're such a light. And I mean, just look at your wall here of just like beautiful inspiration. And before we started, listeners, I was like, I just need to take a moment. I'm going to take in all of your hope around the wall because it's just going to help us ground this conversation, help me ground my conversation. So I appreciate you so much. So
same here.
Of course. So you were speaking about leadership positions just a moment ago. And so I'm going to refer to some of our pre-submitted questions here. And friends, if things are resonating with you, feel free to chime in the chat, ask questions, and we will pepper those in as well. We really appreciate it. Yes. So on the topic of leadership, someone asked, how can we identify if the leadership position we're being offered is precarious?
Absolutely. Hunter, I love this question because I think there's a couple things to look at when you define precarious, right? So the first thing I always say is look at the timeline of the offer. I'll never forget when I was approached by my then supervisor. At the time I was director of academics, and my then supervisor came to me and said there could be a potential to elevate or be promoted in this particular position. Well, looking at the timeline of the offer, the first thing I had to do was say, what is surrounding or what was the catalyst for this ask? So as an individual who's looking at potential promotion, what has happened in the organization? What has happened in the local community, or what has happened to say that this position is going to be available, or that this position could be potentially an opportunity where we want to place you in it? When you understand the circumstances and you're able to glean the facts, and that's as much as you can glean, what leads up to that position being available could be the answer to say, listen, our stocks just dropped. We just had a scandal. A lot of times when we look at the research around the glass cliff, a scandal is the catalyst for women being promoted into positions of leadership. So looking at that timeline of the offer, you're going to gather your facts and you're going to understand, why is this position available? The second thing you want to look at is the timeline of your potential predecessors. So thinking about, how long did each of the individuals before me hold that position? How long did they have an opportunity to implement some of the programs and initiatives? And then what are the narratives and stories, as much as I'm able to glean around their particular narratives? That is going to give you factual metrics and information regarding what could potentially characterize your tenure, should you decide to take that position. And it's also going to tell you, if every predecessor before you has only held that role for 3 to 6 months, or 9 to 12 months, or had they had great longevity with great success, that's going to let you know whether or not it may be good for you in terms of your mental, physical, and professional wellness to take that position. And then last but not least, and we forget this a lot of times, but look at the timeline of the job title and the timeline of the job description. If you look back at the particular job title that they're offering, or the position that they're offering you, has the title changed, or have the descriptions of that job changed in terms of the daily responsibilities, the goals, and the success metrics? If that has shifted a lot over the past couple of months, weeks, years, that's going to tell you something important. And that's that either that position is misplaced in the organizational structure of the company, or no one really knows what that job is supposed to do. And so for you, if you're thinking about going into a role and you have a very clear idea of where you want to go in the company, or where you want to go in the organization, understanding what your organization understands may be a good opportunity for you to create your own role, to elevate the value proposition that you bring to the role and say, hey, can we add this to the job description because I do this well? And when we tie it to your business goals, I think I could be a value add. So those are the 3 things I say. Look at the timeline of the offer, look at the timeline of your predecessors, and also look at the timeline of how the title and the description have changed. Based on that information, you'll be able to decide for you, is this job precarious? Is this a good fit for me?
Wow, there's so much great stuff in there. And what I'm hearing overall is to be actively engaged in doing our research.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You must understand where you're working, but you must also understand where your organization is placed in the ecosystem of your community and globally. We are a global workforce at this point. LinkedIn has opened so many doors when it comes to getting information and gleaning feedback. So doing your market research of, what are other companies doing with this position and job description? What are other companies doing to incentivize not only the leader or the woman who's going to sit in that position, but also the work and the success metrics around the position that you're asking me to take on? It's readily available with a click of a button. We just have to be really specific about what it is that we're looking for, and does it match the future trajectory that's going to set us up individually for success?
Oh my gosh, so powerful. And it makes me think of too of, when we're looking at our aspirations and also tying those to our values.
Yes. Yes. Hunter, I'm so glad that you said values, because regardless of whether we're talking about women of color or women, or just simply being an employee or working for an organization, I think my professor, he asked me a really great question a couple of days before I defended my dissertation. He said, Mary, before you get promoted, before you go out there and start applying, I want you to be able to answer one question with confidence and clarity. What are you willing to lose your job over? Because if you can't answer that question standing here with me today, then the time to figure out the answer to that question will not be when you're in crisis. And so when you think about values and having your 3 values in the role that you may potentially take on, in the role that the organization is asking you to take on, is there alignment with what you say, what you do, and how you think in terms of the 3 values that you hold dear? And if that position, if that organization, if that supervisor is asking you to step outside of those values, we already have a misfire. We already have misalignment. And so all of those pieces of information, all of those metrics help you internally really start to make some good decisions about whether or not you want to move forward.
Yeah. Would you be open to sharing with us some of your values? I would love to hear this.
Absolutely. So 3 of my values: honesty, integrity, and transparency.
Mm,
Honesty, simply because I have to be truthful to myself, because it's very, very hard as a woman in senior leadership to really kind of say, let me make these decisions that may not be aligned with the values that I have. But more importantly, it is absolutely not rooted in integrity if I'm asking you to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And so when we think about that authenticity piece, being true to who we are as women, being true to who we are as women of color, and that's a whole completely different narrative. And there's so many different facets of that experience that also come with our leadership, but also with that transparency. The biggest thing that I've seen in the research on the glass cliff is that there's a risk that if we fail, not only as women, but as women of color, that we are going to create more friction for people to come behind us and to be able to step into our stilettos, to sit at the table, to be asked to pull a seat up at the table. And so when we start to think about that, whether you're filling my shoes, whether you are walking in some decisions that I may have made, may not be at the organization anymore, we understand that we may be the first, but we also may be the only if we're not successful. So when I think about my values, and specifically around transparency, I want to be real in sharing my experience and some of the challenges I've faced, and share those strategies with other employees to make it more seamless for their experience. One of my biggest mottos is, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And my goal whenever I sit at a table is to ask, what voices are missing and what experiences have we not considered? And when I ask those 2 questions, I'm true to my 3 values.
wow. Thank you for sharing that. That is so inspiring. I feel like I want to make this can I make that my ringtone? Is that possible? Just like every time I get a notification, just to have that reminder, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. But it's hard because
Yeah.
right now there's so much vying for our attention. So it's
Mm.
just really about keeping it true north when it comes to your leadership.
Yes, absolutely. That North Star, right?
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Okay, so friends, we're going to keep pulling these questions that you submitted in advance. Thank you again for them. Keep those comments and questions coming. We got a little shout out from the chat that someone said, these are great questions to ask. Thank you. Thank you for writing them. And I'm so happy to be a part of it. So someone asked and is sharing, I'm being offered a challenging position, but the company won't be able to increase my compensation for the time being. How would you advise proceeding? I do want the whole professional experience, but logically, I want to be compensated fairly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I appreciate that they talked about the professional experience as well, because I think that that's really important too. There's no guidebook or rule book about how to do this in the professional setting, specifically because feelings are involved when it comes to thinking about, okay, am I nervous? Am I scared? What is my organization feeling? But you're going to hear me say this a lot today, is that businesses do not respond to feelings, they respond to facts. Okay. And a lot of times when we think about navigating that, or a challenging position we may be offered, we have to operate from facts. So the first thing I say, if you're being offered a challenging position, is to respond diplomatically. Ask for time to be able to get back with them after they have shared with you all of the specs that they understand and know about that job right now. So saying, thank you so much for this offer. Can I have 24, 48, or 72 hours, depending on when it is? If it's a Friday, can I have until maybe close of business Monday or Tuesday? During that time, that is going to give you the opportunity to do your market research and to ask the questions of yourself, ask the questions of your network, and ask the questions of the World Wide Web that you desperately need to know before you make that assumption. And again, I'm going back to LinkedIn because I think over the past 3 years, we've seen this implosion of mentorship and network building. So really tapping into your network to ask those questions and say, What are salaries for similar roles in similar sized companies and organizations in my industry? And then as you start to think about the market research and you're answering those questions, the next thing is create a timeline of your desired salary. So if you have a number in mind and you say, this is what my value consists of, this is the number that takes into account the experiences, my schooling, certifications, professional development, and the time that I have spent curating myself as a thought leader, as an expert, as a specialist in this particular area, I know that you may be able to come in at this offer here. How long would it realistically take us to be able to get to my number? Employers oftentimes are looking for solutions. And when we add efficiency to that decision-making model by already having a proposed timeline, we kind of take that guesswork out to where they can say, hey, listen, you may have given us a 3-month timeline. Can we extend this to 6? Because at least you're starting the conversation with, I know this is the number, but my goal is to be able to get here. And I need you to partner with me realistically to be able to do that. And then I think the next thing is, if they cannot reach your salary, or if that timeline is just going to be a little bit longer than what you would like, negotiate alternatives on the climb. So we're talking about a challenging leadership position. Within that, and I think this is the biggest part about the glass cliff, is that with that risk, there also comes a huge opportunity for burnout, for stress, really that acculturative stress that oftentimes come with women in these senior leadership positions being in rooms and spaces where we're not often invited or even welcomed. So negotiate some alternatives and say on the climb to the salary, or if the organization isn't able to meet it, say, can we negotiate some flex time or maybe work from home time as an arrangement, and offer how that will look. Say during this time, this is what a potential schedule could look like. Again, just be as thorough and as detailed as possible. You can even negotiate for stock options, maybe even sometimes a title change. And sometimes with that title change in the organizational policy, you'll see that salaries are attached to those title changes. Vacation time, professional development funds. I tell women all the time that I coach, it is your duty to leave this position better than the way that you came into it. So if you can negotiate professional development funds to be able to go to conferences, to be able to hire a leadership coach of your choosing, to add skills to your tool set, you can take that with you to any role you serve in. So don't think organization specific, think you specific in terms of growing you, making you better for the organization, while at the same time you're making yourself better. And then last but not least, and this is the biggest one, after you've taken the time and you've market research, you've asked your questions, you created your timeline, negotiated alternatives, get the entire offer and all of your specifications in writing, get it signed, and get it dated with the job title of the individual at that current time. HR thrives on documentation. And the more receipts that you have, should the risk become too great, should the job or challenge become so precarious that they're thinking about either you're thinking about resigning or they're thinking about letting you go, I think it's really important that during that time that you get that opportunity and that offer in writing to back you up later.
Dotting your I's and crossing your T's.
Yes, sir. It's very, very important because conversations can be interpreted differently after the ink has dried. So if you have it in writing, you have your receipts.
Oh, so helpful. Okay, friends, we are exactly at the half-hour mark here. So if you have any burning questions, now is the time, these last 30 minutes here. So another pre-submitted question we have is, what advice would you give women of color when asking for a promotion and or a raise?
Ooh. This is personal because let me tell you, mastering your story is absolutely everything. Specifically as women of color, one thing we always say, and normally we see this in marketing, but it's a value proposition. It is positioning what you uniquely and specifically can bring to the organization that no one else can bring. And then by carving out that space, what you're doing is you're communicating your narrative. You're saying, this is how long I've been with the organization. These are programs and initiatives that I have started, maybe I've incubated within the organization. But again, going back to facts, not feelings, tying your narrative to how you added value to the organization is the language that we want to translate. So a lot of times what I'll tell women, especially the leaders that I coach, I'll say, take an opportunity to get the strategy and the current vision, mission, and organizational goals that stand right now in your organization, what's widely talked about in the C-suite or higher with the hiring professionals or HR. Tie your narrative to those goals. So if the goal of the organization is to be a competitive global organization that lifts up its employees to empower them, then you're going to talk about ways that you've not only put in recruitment efforts to get the most diverse employees, not only when it comes to culture and creed and background and race, but also with perspective and opinions and technology and innovation to the table. When you have diverse teams, you make organizations 87% better in their decision making and increase their bottom line by over 60%. I can't think of any C-suite, I can't think of any executive leader that doesn't want to hear that you're going to make the organization more money, you're going to create more impact in this organization. So mastering your story is huge. And then last but not least, change your perspective of who holds your value. Earlier, you talked about there was an individual who was has a challenging opposition or proposition in front of them. And I said, know your number. When we understand that it's not the organization that holds our value, it's us who holds our value, that helps you establish your bottom. And once you establish your bottom, you know where to start. So when you change the perspective and say, I have spent the time, I have spent the clarity, I have done the work to be able to hone this role to make it better for the organization, then it becomes very clear and easier to be able to navigate that number upwards. I think as women of color, another thing that really has helped me too, and there was a great article that came out a couple of years ago for women specifically, but I believe for women of color, is eliminating the word just from your vocabulary. And so a couple of years ago, I really worked to stop saying, hey, I just wanted to pop in and say, I'm just sending an email in order to, I just wanted to let you know, because there's this fine line between aggression and assertion. So as you think about mastering your story, as you think about your daily interactions, removing any doubt that you know, that you know, that you know, that you're competent enough, that you're confident enough, and that you have enough clarity to be able to see this role, this position, and what's set up in front of you all the way to the end. All of that confidence really helps build that value proposition for you. And it helps you communicate very clearly about what it is you will accept and what it is you will not.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Jay gave a shout out in the chat. Oh, wow, removing the word just. I totally resonate with that as well as a queer person. I just need to just like, it was in my vocabulary all the time. And I've also clocked that. I didn't know about this article. Thank you for mentioning that. And for me, when I clock it, I'm like, oh, I'm trying to take up less space.
Yes.
And I am diminishing my worth in the room. That's my relationship to that word.
Absolutely. And Hunter, why that's so important is because we need your story in the room. We need your perspective in the room, because the more information I understand about you, and not only Hunter, but here's the piece, and I'm so glad you brought this up. A lot of times as women of color, we're called upon to give the narrative of women of color. There can be 30 women of color in the room, and that's 30 different stories, 30 different perspectives, 30 different experiences that, guess what, all have truth. And most importantly, they all have value. But if we decide as an organization, there's only one pathway to truth for women of color, there's only one pathway to truth for persons with disabilities, or the individuals who are a part of the LGBTQIA plus community, then we completely have dismantled the idea of inclusion, which means that's a space where Hunter is respected, Hunter is reflected, and Hunter is expected. And that may be very different than why Mary is respected or reflected or expected in the room, but they all matter. Both of those narratives matter.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, so strong. We got some more responses from the chat here. Someone mentioned that they've been removing the phrase, I think.
Yes, I love that. That's a new, I'm going to add that one too. Thank you so much, Priscilla. Removing, I think, too many question marks. Because
Mhm.
again, if you know that you know, it's taking up that space, it's taking up the academic and intellectual property that you own. And
Mm.
so instead of renting the idea that you might be right, own it.
My gosh, Mary, you just mic drops left and right. Come on, come on. Instead of renting the idea, just own it. Come on. Own it. Oh, sorry. Don't just own it. Own it. See, I added
Own
it
it.
in there. I gotta watch
There you
myself.
go.
Watch
Get
it, honey.
you. Get you. That's
Yes, and
great.
also a shout out to respected and expected in the space.
Yes. Thank you, Tamara. Absolutely. And I think the difference is, and again, I work with so many amazing leaders, but going into an office or going into a board meeting for the first time where you may not have been formally introduced, and
Mhm.
someone saying, "Are you in the right room?" Or "This is the room for the engineers," or "This is the room for the senior executives." The question in and of itself is just dripping with assumptions and bias.
Yeah,
And so in a truly inclusive space, the question you're asking is, how can I get you a seat? What can I do to make this new first meeting for you a little bit better? How can I help you navigate so that you can fully participate in the experience that's about to happen? Changing our questions can change a lot of culture
mhm.
challenges for organizations.
Yeah, and what I'm really hearing from that last one is, are you in the right room? We've talked a lot about here at Power to Fly. We're familiar with DE and I, and here we also embrace the B in that at the end, DE and I and B, which is belonging. And if someone says, "Are you in the right room?" I immediately feel like I don't belong.
Exact. It's polarizing. And
Yeah.
it sort of takes you out of the human experience of being in a space where you were accepted because you got the job. You're here, you're in the space. So I appreciate that perspective, Hunter.
Jay, thank you. And I'm just going to give out another shout out to the chat here. Jay said, as someone who was taught to downplay my intelligence, this conversation is slapping me around in a good way, removing blockages for me. Thank you for sharing that, Jay.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you so much for that. I really, really appreciate that. And again, it's in this space that I think that it doesn't have to be uncomfortable, but if it takes us to the edge of where we're comfortable and complacent, it's going to help us grow. And that's
Absolutely.
the goal.
Yeah, and thinking about these things, for our history of how we got this far, these things have
Mm,
served us, right? There's a
yes.
time and a place where me being smaller might have saved my life, might have helped me slip through the cracks to get a job that maybe I wouldn't have gotten because of who I am as a queer person, or whatever your scenario is. I'm just speaking for myself. But now these things no longer serve me, and I can
Yes.
learn new things with conversations from like this from you. That's like, oh, maybe I can just invite letting that one go. Does it serve me anymore?
Yes. Oh, Hunter, just it's amazing that the reflection that's happening for human beings on the
Mm.
planet to say, did I learn this mental model when I was in survival? And am I still in a place where I need to survive, or am I in a place where I need to adopt a mental model that's going to help me thrive? Because if we're always leading from fright or flight, or if we're always leading from a place with a skill set that we use when we were just simply trying to make it day to day, we may be using antiquated tools. And we may have adopted an antiquated mindset that doesn't fit the current model anymore. But it's that inner work. I always tell leaders, explore your inner self every day. Find something in there that's serving you and find something in there that's not. And if you find something that's not, ask why it's still there.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up fight or flight, because one that I heard recently, I was like, oh yeah, I'm fight or flight all the time in my past. Please or freeze.
Oh,
And like that people pleasing, that minimizing of space, that is pleasing. Or do I freeze if I don't feel belonging? Right.
oh, I love that. Please or freeze. I'm gonna have to add that to my tool set, but it's accurate. It's
Yeah.
accurate. And does pleasing you serve me in the long term
Right.
at this moment?
Right.
That's big.
Right. Well, let's go on the facts
Okay.
over feelings, right? Right.
Yes, yes.
So another pre-submitted question we have is, what are the main challenges women of color face navigating leadership positions?
So there's so many, so many.
Yes.
However, when I start to really think about those that have been amplified over the past couple of years, particularly as we're climbing our career ladders, it is the isolation. So when we think about the fact that women of color now increasingly 13% more in 2023 than in 2022, just in the past 2 months, okay? When we start thinking about this idea of isolation, when you're a woman of color in a senior leadership position in your organization, it's very, very rare that you can open your door and go have a similar like-minded conversation with another woman of color in a senior leadership role because we are so few and far between. That isolation does two things. One, it sort of leaves me without a good arsenal. It leaves me without a good tool set. It leaves me without a good foundation to be able to say, how do I do this? Am I doing this accurately? Specifically, if there's no consistent accountability measures or success metrics that were set up before you got the role. But the other piece of the isolation that we don't talk about is that for women of color, the assumption is a lot of times, if I ask for help, if I ask for clarity, if I ask for support, that means I don't know, that means I can't do it, or that means I'm underqualified. So sometimes the isolation is in our own doing because we know that if we open up our doors, we know that if we open up that email or pick up the phone and ask, that that may be interpreted as that we're not qualified for that position. So that isolation over time is wearing. It can burn you out, and it can often make you think that you're not doing a good job when actually you're knocking it out of the park when it comes to the decisions you're making to turn the situation around or turn the company point of view north toward its goals. And then I think the second thing is this idea of acculturative stress. So what that says is, this is an opportunity, this is an ecosystem, this is a space that I'm not used to. I'm not sure necessarily about the relationship models. We talked about networking just a few minutes ago. Who do I really truly need to be asking for help? Who do I report to, and who does that person, who are they talking to? How do they glean support? How are they communicating what it is that I'm doing specifically in this role? Or how do I navigate this environment? We talk a lot of times about paraprofessionals and how they truly run the organization, the eyes and ears of the organization, because they see things and they hear things. How is developing relationships with paraprofessionals at the senior leadership level going to help me when it comes to just efficiency, the tasks, the details, the communication loops that I may not be aware of? Over time, if you have to really lean into that space of your mental model when it comes to just acculturating yourself to the climate, that can be stressful after a few weeks, after a few months. And over time, mentally, that can really, really start to wear you down. And then last but not least, truly, when we start to think about the stress, it's also the bias. So I talked about the collective experience for women of color. The individual idea for women of color can look like anything from a microaggression that says, oh, you're really pretty for a woman of color, or you enunciate really well, or we just knew you were perfect for this position. As if we don't stop and really think about how bias plays a role implicitly, unconsciously, and all of the isms that have really precipitated the role and the promotion itself, then we also compound that once we get into these roles. And then we just have these stacked biases, these stacked microaggressions, micro assaults, micro invalidations that over time, if we don't check it and if we're not accountable for it, it can really start to wear us down.
Absolutely. You've been getting so much shout outs in the
Oh,
chat here. Someone also mentioned, they said they're going to have to start paying you because you're doing better than their therapist today. So which we can segue later into private coaching, but we'll save that for the end. We'll which is different than therapy, everyone, just to be clear.
very different.
But there's perfect segue for what you were just saying about these so many microaggressions and the list of micros that are available, unfortunately, out there that are happening. So
Yes.
someone asked, what advice do you have for women of color experiencing challenges at work, different standards, extra scrutiny, criticism? Should we start to look for another job ASAP? It seems that staying and trying to improve the situation never works.
Truly. So here's the thing I always say, you have to define your bottom. You have to define your boundaries. And Hunter, you said it earlier, you have to define your values. So what I mean by your personal bottom is you have to define what workplace situation is completely unacceptable for you to live and lead in. And by that, that can look very different. So we have so many individual and amazing women and allies right here on this call. We could have a ton of different realities when it comes to thinking about what your personal bottom is. But once you define that and once you're clear, the next thing is to define your boundaries. What specific examples, what specific instances, what specific interventions have you had that challenge your values or worse, have crossed your boundaries, but there's been no action to alleviate it? There's been no action to change it. And there's been no action to even start the understanding that this is a boundary that has been crossed professionally. And then with that values question, which I hope happens before you apply, before you arrive at the organization, look at the past 6 months. Have you been asked, have you had to, or have you been forced to make a decision, make a hire, or say something, do something that goes against your personal values? I read a great quote the other day that says, every time I have to tell a little white lie, a part of my heart turns black. And so when we think about that personal bottom, when we think about those boundaries, when we think about those values, we change a little bit every time we compromise on what it is that we need. When Hunter says yes, when he really wants to say no, he's compromising a little bit of himself. When Jai says, I have to make this decision as a leader, even though I personally don't believe in it, a little bit of herself is compromised. So when you know your bottom, you just have to say, no, this is not me. This is not in alignment with the leader I want to be. And when we talk about the glass cliff, the research is telling us that a lot of reasons that women of color are stepping into these roles, but now are finding themselves leaving senior leadership, leaving their organizations altogether and starting businesses, is because that the risk associated with precarious leadership positions like this, like we're talking about today, also have the risk to damage reputations. Because if you fail in one of those situations in a company that's already failing, that makes the failure more grandiose. And a lot of times that track record of professional failure and or success is going to follow you, just based on the fact that we have a very global network in 2023 that is becoming more globalized by the day, by the second.
Absolutely. When you were talking about our own values and defining our own bottom, and I love it because these things are a relationship to our feelings for ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the companies want the facts, but it's important for us to be in touch with those feelings, right?
Yeah.
So a friend of mine says, if it feels wrong, it probably is wrong.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Check with your mentor, check with your trusted, team, your whatever, your Fab Five, whatever, whoever those people are for you, that's where you can get some feedback. Like, okay, before moving forward, I love those check-ins with trusted people. But you got to listen to your gut, right?
Absolutely. And I love that you said Fab Five. And it doesn't matter if you're in a senior leadership position or entry level or working for yourself, you have to have people to be able to check in with you who are going to be critical friends. And tell you, hey, listen, I know the goal is this, but your action said this. I know you're thinking this, but I also want you to think about this because I know where you're going. Mm-hmm. And again, when we replace our yes women, yes men with critical friends, like it just helps you become a better leader and a better human overall.
Yes, absolutely. And those that can help me see some of my blind sides. You're like, you're missing one thing, whether it's about them or sometimes it's about my own stuff that I'm like, yep, missed that. You're right. Thanks for holding up the mirror to me. I appreciate you.
Exactly. And that mirror just helps us grow and we see something different in it a lot of times every time you look in the mirror. So when you have other people who can see your stuff, think about how much sharper, how much more confident you're going to be later on. I love that, Hunter.
Oh, yeah. So we were talking about microaggressions before and the many list of micros. Someone asked, what are some tactful, effective ways to handle microaggressions at work?
Absolutely. So really and truly, when we talk about microaggressions, and I feel like we don't talk about this enough in the DEI plus B space, is that microaggressions are also micro assaults and micro invalidations. So the aggression is or just the little slights, the snubs and things that I say to you to make you feel less than. The assaults are on the entire entity or the organization or the community with which you identify. But the invalidation just completely erases the fact that you have the credentials to be here. But what I love about microaggressions is that truly you can take micro interventions and micro affirmations to be able to combat them. So, what do I mean by that? I have a lot of times people will say to me, you speak so well. You're so articulate. I can understand you so clearly. Well, truly, when I think about a micro intervention, it's simply, as easy as saying, can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that? I really want to clarify my understanding of that statement. What you just said, Hunter, about the mirror, that micro intervention holds the mirror right up to the individual and says, I need you to put words to your why. And I need you to find the reason as to why you connected articulation and my specific experience. Now, this is going to tell you two things. If they have a good, solid, authentic answer, you're going to know right off the bat if it's coming from the heart or if it's coming from the head. And then if they don't have a response and they're arrested in their own decision making as to why they said that, that also gives you a point of clarity as to where that came from so that you can accurately label it as a microaggression. But when I think about those productive responses as micro affirmations, it's finding ways to assist others in a way that's less reactive and less supportive. It's learning to pronounce names correctly. That's a micro affirmation. Instead of assuming how to pronounce someone's name. So, even for instance, we have Jai or Jay. And again, I want to ask her, how do I accurately pronounce that? Because I want her to belong in this virtual space. So, when I call her out, I want to be able to say it. That conversation took less than 10 seconds, but it affirmed her. And even though it was 10 seconds, that was a micro affirmation to say, you belong in this room. And while you're here, I want to address you appropriately. So, a lot of times looking at applications and maybe calling, maybe sending an email saying, how do you pronounce your name accurately so that when you arrive, I can welcome you into this space and you can focus on what it is you want to communicate with me. And I can hold a space for you that's safe enough for you to tell me who you really are. That's a micro affirmation. And so thinking about all of these different ways, there's also micro interventions, disarming the microaggression. That's what I just did when I said, can you tell me a little bit more about why you said that? I'm disarming the fact that you may have used it to invalidate the fact that women of color do not know how to speak appropriately or enunciate. I'm also stepping in to stop the impact. Why? Because that individual, because of the way we're wired psychologically, is going to take an extra second before they say it to the next woman of color to really identify and anchor why they said it. Now, if they don't take that 1 second, that's also a choice. However, I did my part in that interaction to try to disarm. So we can combat microaggressions with micro interventions and micro affirmations. And by doing this actively and practicing it, I practice these with my Fab Five so that I don't have to stop or stutter when I'm doing it, when I'm in the moment. But that helps people to really think about, reflect, deflect, and disarm what it is that they're doing or saying that may just make us feel completely uninclusive.
This is a master class, friends. Dr. Mary Hemphill is just put you on a TEDx, TED stage. Just let's all, I am so grateful for this. This is so incredible. We only have 5 minutes left and we have so many more questions that we were hoping to get to. If you see any there that you would really like, is there anything in these last 5 minutes, Mary, that you would really like to dig into before we wrap up?
Absolutely. I really just want to say, if we take nothing from this, is that when we think about the glass cliff and when we think about women of color who increasingly are finding themselves on it, it's really about the difference between enabling and empowering.
Mm,
If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So
mm,
once we get into these positions, we can either enable antiquated processes and mindsets and assumptions and stereotypes that haven't served us well, don't serve organizations, and will not thrive in this futuristic mindset of the workplace that we have, or we can empower those spaces by mastering our story, by being able to disarm those microaggressions, by being able to say, I'm taking the word just out of my vocabulary and I'm going to navigate this with confidence and clarity, not only for myself, but also for those who may come behind me. But I'm also going to ask for what it is I need to be able to thrive while I'm here. So if I know that this is a precarious situation, if I know that I'm going into this and this may be taxing on my mental, I'm going to ask not for extra EAP sessions. I'm going to ask for more opportunities for mental health days and wellness days, or perhaps funds for a therapist of my choosing. Again, we have to stop assuming as organizations that that EAP program is a full fit for everyone. With everyone's religious background and culture backgrounds when it comes to how they arrive at their different spaces and positions, that EAP program may not be as inclusive as you think it is. So give people the opportunity to choose someone or a therapist or any other mental wellness strategies or on ramps of their choosing. But when we are able to do that, do the pre work, know the research, and step into those spaces, we are going to find that the glass cliff is going to start dismantling. It's going to take time. It's going to take all of us having conversations just like this. But over time, my goal is that the glass cliff will decrease in terms of being a phenomenon that's impacting women across and around the planet.
wow. That's all I can say is wow. I'm just floored by this conversation. And in these last couple minutes, Mary, how can folks stay connected to you? How can they reach out? Can they come to you for questions, resources? What do they do?
Absolutely. So you can either email me at mary@thelimitlesslady.com or go to our website, www.bealimitlessleader.com. All of my contact information, programming, our coaching, our group coaching packages, all of those things are on there, as well as you can find me on LinkedIn at Dr. Mary Hemphill. And there's a ton of information and videos. We have resources. We even have mental health courses as well for your available for individuals and leaders.
That's so incredible. Mary, if you could give in this last minute, if you could give yourself go back in time and give yourself some advice when you're starting your career journey in the context of what we're talking about now, what would you say to that person starting out?
Oof. Show up.
Mm,
Show up in your full self. Because if you don't show up for you, there's somebody who's waiting on you to show up and to be able to inform that space to make it safer for them. I cannot tell you how many times, because I decided to shine my light as brightly as I possibly could, because I did that, the people who were supposed to find me did. And so show up, show out, and know that when you stand in your truth, when you stand in your authenticity, that there are others who are waiting on your boldness to be able to step into their purpose.
beautiful. So I'm going to take that to my present self and use that advice for the rest of my day and for my 5-year plan. So Dr. Mary Hemphill, thank you so, so much for dedicating this time and your presence and your insight for us. It is such a joy to share space with you. I hope we get to do it again and again and again.
Yes, thank you so much, Hunter. You're an amazing host. And thank you to all of you, your questions, your feedback. Thank you for being in the room today. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Hunter.
Absolutely. And thank you all, participants, listeners, for your questions, your feedback, your open hearts, and your willingness to participate. It really means so much, and it really is what makes these conversations possible. So please come back, and thank you for today. So I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day and your week, and we'll see you here at the next chat. We got a whole full calendar check out the website, and we hope to see you at our future events. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you again, Mary.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Hunter. Everybody have a great day.